Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Young Mazino, who plays Paul on the hit Netflix series Beef. Thank you so much for doing this. I feel like it's a breakout role for you. I feel like a lot of people have said it's a breakout character, and your performance is so great. I read other interviews, and you talked a little about how when you first read the character, he really resonated with you from the start. And I guess so what was that first thing about it that you really connected to for you on a personal level or whatever? Yeah.
Um, Let me think back to the character description. Likes to play video games and stream with his friends. He didn't go to college, has a hard time holding a job. Immediately there were several people popping up in my mind just from personal relationships and people I've grew up around. At one point when I was a very disillusioned youth, uh, there was Paul in my life too. I really resonate with the fact that, and Sonny was very intentional with the breakdown where it explains that Paul likes to go to the gym, and I think these days, well, I'm sure this has been happening all the time, but there are a lot of guys who use their physique or physicality to kind of mask whatever internal things are going on, and that becomes this kind of maybe a reflection of self-confidence that they imbue themselves with and they see themselves in the mirror. Paul is not the most confident guy. Especially growing up in the Asian American community, if you didn't go to college and if you're not really working, immediately people will tend to judge that. And so at least he has his brawn, but of course EQ wise he's still on the come up.
Right.
And I really recognize a lot of elements of myself growing up in Paul, as and in a sense that I would be Paul if I never grew up.
Okay.
Um, Essentially Paul.
Yeah. You mentioned his physicality. I think is so interesting, especially the way you play him, because it's almost like I don't know. You're hiding the physicality, right? He's he obviously is so the physicality is there, but at least in the beginning stages of the show, it's you don't realize it, or he's kind of almost concave, I guess. And I guess that physicality, how much did you yeah, can you talk about that? And I think the whole character I find fascinating because the way you kind of obviously the show reveals certain things about why he is the way he is, right? But also your performance I think evolves so much throughout the course of the show that it's really fascinating to me. I just wanted to yeah, how did you kind of calibrate that, I guess, as you were doing?
Yeah, that was really fun to work on, just from an actor's point of view. In drama school, I studied Adler. I studied with Tiago Felix, who does this, lucid body movement, and that's the study of how your physicality informs your emotion and vice versa. Um, as someone who has been in front of a computer for a lot of time, for lengths of time, either as a gamer or as a corporate analyst, I recognize that movement. But going deeper than that, in lucid body, there's this idea of you're either you have seven chakra points, and it's either imploded or exploded. So just a perfect example is if with that physicality, if internally I also was like, man, I'm the shit. Like nobody, and I would walk into a room very just, because I got it. But then Paul, while he has a physicality, he's still internalized. He's still in his own head, and he still thinks that he's under, Danny, his older brother's shadow. And it was fun because we were shooting out of sequence. So I had a clock where depending on which episode, I was trying to track where how my physicality grows, because I wanted Paul to grow throughout the season, where when the impetus of change is when Ali Wong's character Amy enters the fray, and suddenly he finds love, and this thing bursting out of him that draws him into trying to do more and be more. And towards the end of it, he's a little more comfortable with himself, and even in episode 9, when shit is going down, he's just kind of more upright, more exploded energy, which and then the whole height where Paul's up on the roof, he scales the wall. That was very symbolic too. Um, and yeah, it was my first major role. It's always a weird thing because in drama school you work on very wonderful texts like Chekhov and Jason Miller, Arthur Miller, Shakespeare. You work on these complex characters who have so much development throughout the course of a play, and then you go audition for, and you know, you have to kind of, as a rite of passage, go through procedural world, do like co-stars and do like one-liners, and you don't get a lot of room to play. And then suddenly I was given Paul, which, to Sonny's credit, the showrunner, it was a very juicy role to work on, and I got to kind of use as much of my training as I could. And the
Yeah,
physical part of that.
yeah, it's awesome. I mean, like I said, like the show is great, and obviously, like all these characters are so like well written and deep. And I find like even just like talking to friends who are just watching, like I've been still getting, like I watched it like obviously when it came out, but I'm getting like just regular people like text me being like, oh man, have you seen CV? I'm like, yes, it's really really good show. I feel like it is resonating with like a large amount of people, which has got to be very satisfying as well for you.
It's pretty spectacular. To kind of to kill two birds with one stone, where we get to finally show a very accurate and real and hilarious and tragic representation of a particular Asian American diaspora, and at the same time reach, kind of bend genre and bend audiences into realizing we're all kind of at our core the same, and for people across all cultures and communities to reach out and appreciate that. It's a very primal thing, like at a very primal level, because I recall Sonny telling me stories of how people will reach out to him and let him know that at one point they were suicidal even a few days before watching, and then suddenly they feel seen, suddenly they feel less alone, which is kind of the real milestone that Amy and Danny as characters find together when they're lost in the desert. And it's always, in like religious texts, like in the Bible, when they go into the desert or into the mountains, that's when spiritual things occur. So the whole thing it continues to be a very surreal, lovely journey.
Yeah. You mentioned obviously like Paul's relationship with Danny is so key, and that ninth episode is incredible. And obviously, like I just that sequence you were talking about before, like when Paul climbs the wall and like him and Danny are like Danny's trying to get him to leave so he doesn't maybe get killed or gets out of there just or whatever, and then like Paul doesn't really want to go, and then like finding out the backstory obviously about like how he had Danny had like thrown out his college admission stuff and like really set him on the course that we've seen him on, right? Like all of these things. And even if, that sequence I just found so fascinating too, especially because like, man, Steven is so incredibly, and he generates so much empathy even for Danny when he's like, you're like, oh my God, how did you do something like that's unforgivable? But it's like so tragic because he obviously like so loved Paul. And I guess like, I just found that whole thing like really moving. And I guess, can you talk a little about like, I guess, yeah, like you said, like shooting it at a sequence or whatever, but how did you kind of like, how did you and Steven like talk about that relationship and like kind of build your rapport together as actors? Because I just found it just feels so authentic and real, like, and it's just incredibly moving. Like I said, I think it's like really great.
Yeah. There's a lot of factors to that, but first one being that Steven is so generous with his energy and his time and his thoughts, and he's so articulate, and I think he's one of the smartest people I know. And off the bat, even from the audition room when I first met him, he walks in and I'm like, oh, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit is happening. And then he's like, hey, I want you all to know we're all just as nervous as you are back there. So I want you to have a great time. And that's his improv background of like giving to receive. We met up to play basketball. We got lunch. The basketball was really interesting. I grew up around people with brothers, but I only have two sisters. So having that competition and trying to beat each other in a game was very, and the last play we were tied, and then I had the last bucket and he fouled me, but it barely went in, and when we like landed on our feet, we kind of just had a moment of, because we both were in tune and we're like, yo, this is it, that's the energy, and then we just rode off of that. um and then we get to episode 9. That's such a wonderful scene to work on. There's so much happening there, so much to unpack as Paul. The stakes are high. He's trying to leave, he's trying to escape, and he's that brotherly thing, like, I will not leave my own brother, like personally, I would rather die. Like I won't leave my loved ones behind if something's going down, especially if it's my sisters. But then when Danny sees that his brother's like not leaving, then he is like, I gotta get him in the jugular, and so he reveals like probably something that's been trapping him in his Sisyphean karmic cycle for all these years, and he releases that. And there's a very wonderful moment in Steven's performance where as he releases some of this toxic shame and guilt, there's like a guttural sigh, like a shudder. And I thought that was so powerful. And yeah, it's that's how you know he's great, when even I have empathy for this dude who screwed me over, who essentially has been a mute on my instrument for years, and I'm wondering why doesn't my sound resonate? Uh, and then for that to happen, and in that moment, and I'm sometimes curious about that scene, because it's like, would I say something? Do I, if someone that close to you reveals that they've essentially muted like your growth, I mean, yeah. So sometimes I wonder how I could have replayed that scene. Not that I had any issues with the edit, but that just, again, credit to the directing and the writing, because it's fun. It's just fun.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, I mean, it is something where you're like thinking about like how would you react like in real life, right? Like watching it, like, oh my god, like how do you even respond to that? And like, how do you like is it unrecoverable, right? Like, obviously, like maybe it is. Like, who knows how their relationship will pan out? Like, obviously, after the end of the season, right? Like, it's like we don't know, but at least we know like Paul's okay. Like, we get that confirmation, but like not aware of how their relationship can even get fixed, because it just is like something that you can't come back from. I don't know. I mean, I just found that like really fascinating and like obviously like so tragic. Like I said, it's like really great scene. It's so good. Did you guys do that? Like, how many times are you able to do a scene like that where there was so much like emotion and like kind of like so much subtext, like you're saying, and all these different things that you have to play? Did you do? Is that like something you guys are just like? Did you do it like once or like 100 times? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, we were towards the end of the night. I think we were a bit short on time, so it felt like a bit of a scramble. But they were also super. Everyone was super respectful about realizing the stakes of the scene, giving us space, and we just worked on it. It was like it felt like a intense scene study in the privacy of a blacked out room at Stella Adler. Um, but Steven's also so quick. He's so freaking good. And he was able to, and that was a great learning lesson for me. Even when you have writing what I mean by great writing is not that is so good that you just want to be DLP and say it right off the page, but good writing, and that it empowers the actor and it inspires the actor to find the truth of the scene that everyone is going for. And I think watching Steven calibrate and find that while I was up there on the wall. That was really fun to watch and be
Yeah.
a part of.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, both you too. I just think it's incredible. So you mentioned like Paul's relationship with Amy before and Ali Wong, and obviously that's a great. I just love that's a different flavor than what we're getting from Danny and Paul. And your character I love also because, or I just find it so fascinating because you're the only character really in the show who is significant relationships with both of them, right? Like I feel like, I mean, obviously like there is overlap, but like specifically like you are like a very in deep with Danny, obviously, and then also with Amy. So I guess like how did you kind of like I just found it like it's interesting, like she's catfishing him in the beginning, and then he doesn't even when he finds out, it's like you don't your reaction to that I found is so fascinating. Like Paul's reaction is just like he just kind of rolls with it. And I just the whole thing I just found like really I don't know, I just thought that was like so unexpected, or I just their whole relationship I think is like really interesting. And I guess how did you kind of like similar question before, like how did you approach that with Allie, and like how did you kind of like think about that from Paul's perspective, I guess?
Yeah. From Paul's perspective, I think he has low EQ, partially because of Danny, and I'm sure as they were growing up, when it came to women, Danny also might have meddled in his affairs and kind of skewed Paul from just finding something tangible in relationships. And uh, Amy represents a lot of things that Paul's lacking: the success, the community, the everything that she is. He falls for, and um, perhaps in some ways when he sees that she's a successful Asian woman, he gravitates towards her. But I think at the base of it is just this irrational love. And that's something I had when I was younger before I realized love is not the end all be all and space and time still reigns supreme. But this is, in Paul's state of mind, he's just following his gut and he wants this human, he wants this person, this interaction, the affection. He'll do anything he can within his means, even if it means getting his family drunk, pissed drunk so he can take the car, things like that. I think it stems out of this irrational um love or obsession for another human being. And I used to crush on girls so hard. Part of why I went to New York was because this girl I liked went to NYU, and I was like, oh man, if I could just somehow get in proximity, maybe. And that kind of naivete is what helped me ignore how hard it was to actually do the thing. So I approached it with a very naive love mindset.
Yeah. That's awesome. It really is. It's so funny that it's because it is like like you said, like he's so stunted and like his EQ, like you're saying, like is not. So you would think that, right? Like, and I read, I think I was in GQ. I saw you had you talked about how Ali said after, on the last day of shooting, she said like you can have any career you choose. I think was what she had said, which I think is like a really lovely, obviously thing to hear probably for you. And like, I guess
Yeah.
like, what did it mean to hear something like that, especially like after, like doing the show and getting like in there with like this, like you said, like this incredible character and getting to like really show your stuff, I guess.
Yeah. I didn't believe her when she was telling me this. I was just in my mind, I was like, okay, sure. And then I walked away because I think after a couple of years, after years of um, pursuing the career in acting, to protect yourself, to protect oneself, one must kind of be impermeable and not let the highs or lows get to him. So I just took it for a grain of salt. But now in the aftermath, and with all the feedback from people within and outside of the industry, uh, it's very surreal. It's just really weird. I think my head was down for so long, and this reminds me of when I was on a really long bike trail, and we're going on these inclines, and I have like 70 pounds on my bike, and we're going on up a mountain for like 6 hours. It's just climbing, climbing, and everything's burning. And I found for me, what helped me was just to look down and look at each individual pebble that I just come across, and then hours go by, and then I look up and I'm on the top of this beautiful mountain, and it kind of feels like, you know emblematic of this journey where I just was in the weeds for so long and just trying to survive, and then also working on my craft. And I suddenly look up and the world is has opened to me. That being said, things can go well. Things can also go south. I have no idea what will happen, but right now things are looking beautiful, and I'm just appreciating the new view, the new landscape.
Yeah, it's great. And like I said, your performance is so good. I guess I just want to wrap up here. I just wanted to say like one last thing would be like, kind of like a little, what would your, the show is obviously so well known for its music, right? Like, and the music cues are incredible. So I guess for you, like, what was one where you're like, oh shit, that one's really good. I was very into that, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Drive. I always go for Drive because Incubus,
Okay.
that was like my go-to song, my angsty song when I was a kid. But the Pumpkins, Smashing Pumpkins in episode 10, and the last scene, I mean, that was an incredible scene. So the music really lent to that.
Yeah, it's really great. It's so good. The music is so good. I know we talked about obviously so much more, but I was like, I just gotta ask about the music too,
Yeah.
even though it's a little frivolous, maybe. But it's really fun, and the show is great, and your performance, Young, is incredible. Young Mazino plays Paul on the show Beef. You can watch all the episodes on Netflix. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.